at 1:50 on May 19, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood inside the cramped Combat Information Center of the US England. The room was alive, with quiet tension dials glowing amber, sonar screens pulsing with the heartbeat of something alive beneath the waves. Outside, the Pacific stretched black and endless north of Bougainville, a graveyard for ships that never saw what killed them. Pendleton's men said little. The hum of electronics and the soft ping of sonar filled the space between breaths. This was his first war patrol as commanding officer, 37 years old. No kills to his name, but he had something other captains lacked: faith in numbers. Pendleton believed mathematics could outthink instinct, that a disciplined mind could be deadlier than tradition. The Japanese Imperial Navy had placed 7 submarines in a scouting line across the routes to the Marianas. If the Americans could break that line, they could march on Saipan and Guam unhindered. England was a Buckley-class destroyer Escort, 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer. Lighter, faster, and built for one obsession: hunting submarines. Half her crew were new, barely out of training. But their ship carried a weapon few trusted: a forward-firing spigot mortar system the British had named Hedgehog. 24 steel tubes set in 4 neat rows on the forecastle. Each launched a 65-pound projectile, tipped with 35 pounds of Torpex, a high-energy explosive. Unlike depth charges, they didn't explode on a timer. They detonated only on contact, a design that separated fact from guesswork. For 3 decades, navies had relied on depth charges, crude, thunderous barrels rolled off the stern, timed by depth fuses and prayer. The odds were cruel: over 5,000 attacks for 85 confirmed kills. 1 in 60 found its mark. The rest shattered the sea into chaos, destroying sonar contact and leaving the hunter deaf for 15 minutes, plenty of time for a submarine to slip away. Hedgehog changed the mathematics. Fired forward, not behind. It let the ship maintain sonar lock through the attack. If the bombs exploded, it meant a hit. If they didn't, the ocean stayed silent, a language Pendleton trusted. Early trials gave only a 5% success rate, but Pendleton saw potential where others saw failure. 5% was still numbers, and numbers could be improved. 4 days earlier, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had decoded a Japanese transmission from Submarine 116 destination Bougainville. Arrival 2,200 hours, May 19th. Perfect intelligence. Pendleton's group positioned themselves like patient wolves. Now the contact was real. Range 1,500 yards, the sonar operator murmured. I-16 was diving standard evasion. Radical turns, unpredictable depth shifts. The Japanese commander knew he was being hunted. Pendleton's jaw tightened. Prepare Hedgehog. Fire when ready. At 13:41, the first attack went out. 24 projectiles arced through the sky and vanished into the sea. Descending at 23 feet per second, the crew waited. Silence. A miss. The ocean, indifferent, swallowed the sound. I-16 had turned. The second attack, one hit at 130 feet. The blast lifted England's bow, but failed to finish the kill. The third salvo missed. Pendleton studied the fathometer. I-16 had gone deep, 325 feet, deeper than expected. Fourth attack. Another miss. Sweat gathered under steel helmets. Every minute the target lived, it learned. 13:43. The fifth attack. The Hedgehog rack bucked. The shells whistled ahead and plunged into the Pacific. Seconds stretched. Then 4 detonations. Then 6. Then a colossal explosion that shook the ship from bow to stern. The blast hurled men off their feet. and sent a geyser of black water skyward. When it settled, the ocean boiled with oil and wreckage, splintered wood, cloth, and silence. I-16 was gone. 107 men vanished beneath the waves. Pendleton didn't celebrate. Numbers were never sentimental. He knew what the decoded message had also said. 7 more submarines were out there, spread along the Na patrol line north of the Admiralty Islands. 7 shadows against 1 ship. But England's first strike had rewritten the equation. 5 attacks, 1 kill, 20% success. 4 times better than the weapons trial record. A machine built on mathematics had found its proof. That night, Pendleton stood on deck, salt spray stinging his face, and watched the oil slick drift under moonlight. Somewhere below lay a coffin of steel and silence. Somewhere ahead waited 7 more just like it. The Pacific was vast, but not vast enough to hide them all. The USS England turned northeast, engines low, sonar sweeping. The crew reloaded their Hedgehog mounts, men moving with the rhythm of new belief. They had seen the weapon work. They had heard the difference between silence and success. For the first time, the crew felt something rare in the dark sea, not luck, not courage, but certainty. The message from Fleet Radio Unit Pacific came through at dawn on May 20th. Commander Hamilton Haynes, stationed at Tulagi, read it twice before speaking. The Japanese 7th Submarine Squadron had deployed 7 Type Co submarines along a patrol line codenamed Na. The line stretched from Truk Island to the waters west of Manus. Each vessel evenly spaced row 104, row 105, row 106, row 108, row 109, row 112, and row 116. Their mission was clear: locate American carrier groups advancing toward the Marianas or Palau. They were Admiral Somu Toyoda's, eyes beneath the waves. Haynes didn't hesitate. He ordered US England to join her sister destroyer escorts, George and Raby. 3 ships against 7 submarines, an absurd equation, but Pendleton didn't flinch. He had already seen the math bend once before. They departed Purvis Bay on May 21st, moving into a formation like a comb cutting through black water, 16,000 yards between ships, radar sweeps every 30 seconds, sonar pinging continuously. It was a hunt without conversation, a chess game played blind. The Japanese submarines had now gone radio silent. The Americans would have to find them the old way, by patience, sound, and timing. Pendleton studied the charts in his cabin. He saw the logic in the enemy's pattern. The Japanese always placed their submarines along previous American routes, betting that the US Navy would return through familiar waters. It was a gambler's tactic built on habit. But what Toyoda didn't know was that American codebreakers had already mapped his eyes. The advantage was now reversed. Submarine behavior was predictable, too. They surfaced at night to recharge batteries and breathe through diesel engines, then submerged at dawn to hunt blind and silent. That rhythm, that narrow window of surfacing was the key. A submarine commander who lingered too long on the surface might not live to dive again. At 3:50 on May 22nd, radar aboard US George picked up a surface contact at 15,000 yards, row 106, running on diesel, unaware her hunters were near. In seconds, George's searchlight sliced the darkness. The Japanese vessel crash-dived, flooding her ballast tanks, bow plunging steeply. She disappeared in under 90 seconds. At 4:15, George fired the first Hedgehog salvo. 24 projectiles hissed into the water. Silence followed. Miss. Then England regained sonar contact at 4:25 1,000. 400 yards. The submarine was maneuvering wildly, turning hard, changing depth. The Japanese commander was no amateur. He was playing the standard defense weave, turn, confused the mathematics. Pendleton watched the sonar operator, a young man with pale eyes and steady hands, track each movement. Bearing depth change, maintain lock, he said, voice flat, almost calm. The data rolled into Pendleton's calculations. Fire. The first attack missed row 106, had turned 30 degrees during projectile descent, 9 seconds of sink time, 150 feet of lateral drift. The second attack came at 5-1. 24 projectiles descended in a perfect ring. 3 detonations, then a fourth, deeper, louder. The sea convulsed. England's hull shuddered under the pressure wave. George and Raby, 4,000 yards away, felt the tremor like an aftershock. At sunrise, the ocean was slick with oil. Splintered timber and black fragments floated amid bubbles of trapped air. There were no survivors. To kill number 2, 24 hours after the destruction of I-16, England and her companions reformed their line, 16,000 yards apart, sweeping northeast along the patrol zone. 6 submarines remained, each one a steel coffin waiting for a name. At 6 on May 23rd, Raby's radar caught another surface contact 22,000 yards. The blip vanished almost instantly. The Japanese commander had seen the threat, diving before the Americans could identify him. Row 104, perhaps. Pendleton felt the old thrill of mathematics tightening again. Raby attacked first 4 Hedgehog salvos, each a clean miss. The submarine turned sharply within the circular fall pattern, slipping through the cracks in probability. George tried next, launching 4 more patterns between 7:17 and 8:10. All misses. The enemy captain was skilled, unpredictable in depth, rhythmic in motion, but too erratic to predict precisely. From the bridge of US George, Division Commander Haynes watched England approach for her run. There was a pause, static, radio chatter, then 5 words that would enter naval legend. "Oh hell. Go ahead, England." Pendleton's crew moved like a machine. The first salvo missed expected. He adjusted the firing solution by degrees, correcting for the submarine's zigzag. The second salvo fired at 8:34. 10 detonations, maybe 12. The sea erupted in a continuous roar. Then came the breaking noises, metal shearing, bulkheads collapsing, the telltale rumble of a hull imploding under pressure. Minutes later, the surface boiled with oil and wood fragments. Another contact gone. Another patch of Pacific turned black. Kill number 3. 72 hours. 3 submarines. 163 Japanese sailors dead. But in the silence that followed, Pendleton wasn't triumphant. He knew each success shortened their future odds. The Japanese would learn. They always did. Every kill rewrote the playbook for both sides. He looked out over the waves, eyes catching the early sunlight shimmering across the slick. The Pacific had no mercy, no applause, only proof. And proof was all he ever needed. England steamed onward, her sonar whispering into the depths, searching for the next pulse of movement, the next equation waiting to be solved. By the night of May 23rd, the men of the US England had stopped whispering about luck. They spoke now about rhythm, the rhythm of sonar pings, the rhythm of turning valves, the rhythm of detonations that rolled like thunder through steel. Each man could feel when the next kill was close, the same way an artist feels when a canvas is nearly complete. At 1:20 on May 24th, US George's radar caught another ghost on the surface 15,000 yards off the bow. The contact dove fast, barely visible before slipping beneath the waves. Row 116. Pendleton was already on the bridge before the radar operator finished calling it out. Sound contact bearing 230, range 2000. England's sonar team locked on. The pattern repeated. Radar contact, crash dive, sonar pursuit, Hedgehog attack. But this submarine commander had changed the game. Instead of diving deep like the others, row 116 stayed shallow, barely 150 feet down. It was a bold, almost suicidal gamble. Shallow water meant less cushion against explosions, but also less margin for American calculations. Hedgehog crews were used to setting deeper firing solutions. A shallow target could make them miss entirely. Pendleton's sonar operator adjusted instantly. Shallow contact. Estimate 150 feet. Pendleton nodded. Correct firing depth. Load pattern. Fire. At 2:14, 24 projectiles splashed forward, sinking like a metal rain. 3 detonations, maybe 5, not the gut-punch roar of previous kills. Just a hard, ugly cracking sound that vibrated through the deck plates. Then, a long, slow groan echoed up through the hull, the sound of steel surrendering to pressure. Inside the submarine, the physics were merciless. At 150 feet, water forced itself through even a 3-inch hole at over 400 gallons a minute. Bulkheads bent, air turned to mist, and the temperature climbed by hundreds of degrees as electrical systems shorted and fires burned without flame. The crew of row 116 never stood a chance. Within 6 minutes, the submarine had become a sinking furnace. At sunrise, oil and debris surfaced small at first, then spreading across the waves like a bruise. 56 more sailors were gone. Kill number 4. By noon, the reports reached Washington. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, read them in his office with the kind of silence reserved for miracles. A destroyer Escort, not a fleet destroyer, not a cruiser, had sunk 4 enemy submarines in 5 days, using a weapon most captains still distrusted. He dictated a single message to the Pacific Fleet: "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy." The phrase spread faster than any order. Within hours, it became a toast whispered in wardrooms and mess decks across the Pacific. But for Pendleton, the words only meant more pressure. On May 25th, Admiral Halsey wanted England reassigned to carrier escort duty. She was too valuable now, too experienced to risk. Commander Haynes refused. There were 3 submarines left on the NA line. He believed England could finish the job. Let her hunt, he insisted. Halsey, after a long silence, agreed. 1 more patrol. That evening, northeast of Seidler Harbor, the ocean was calm and metallic under the stars. At 23:03, Raby's radar caught a contact 15,000 yards. The submarine dove immediately. England's sonar caught it moments later. Row 108. The chase was on again. The Japanese commander repeated row 116 seconds. Mistake shallow run, sharp turns, trying to confuse the attack pattern. Raby moved in first and missed. Then Haynes' voice came over the radio once more. Go ahead, England. At 23:23, the Hedgehog launchers fired. 24 projectiles arced forward in near-perfect symmetry, entered the sea, and disappeared into blackness. 4 explosions. Then 6. Then a single roar that merged them all into one massive concussion. The sea erupted with foam and fragments. When the shockwave reached George and Raby miles away, the men on their decks cheered not loud, but with the grim satisfaction of professionals who knew they had just witnessed precision at work. Row 108 didn't sink gradually. She imploded instantly, breaking apart in seconds, her pressure hull collapsing from multiple hits. 56 sailors died faster than thought itself. Kill number 5. 6 days. 5 submarines. 279 men gone. As the England cut through the black water, its wake shimmered faintly in the starlight. Pendleton stood at the rail, expression unreadable. The men were exhausted but alert. every muscle tuned to expectation. They had begun to trust the Hedgehog not just as a weapon, but as an extension of themselves, a steel instinct built on mathematics. Yet victory carried a strange quiet. The Pacific, vast and pitiless, showed no sign of the battles below. No wrecks, no graves. Only oil slicks dissolving in moonlight. Pendleton knew that somewhere ahead, the last two submarines still lurked, learning from the deaths of their brothers. The next engagements would not be easy. He looked toward the horizon, a thin, glowing line where night began to fracture into dawn. The war was far from over. But for 6 relentless days, in a forgotten corner of ocean, a small escort ship and her crew had turned arithmetic into annihilation. By the time news of the 5th kill reached Tokyo, Admiral Toyoda already understood something was terribly wrong. 7 submarines had been dispatched along the Na patrol line. 5 were gone, 1 per day. No distress calls, no survivors, no signals, just silence. The Imperial Navy's invisible eyes had been blinded by something it couldn't see or comprehend. Orders went out immediately. The remaining submarines, Row 105 and Row 109, were to change everything. Minimum patrol depth, 400 feet. No surfacing except when absolutely necessary. And when detected, no radical maneuvers. Turning sharply, they realized, only gave sonar operators a pattern to read. Better to run silent, fade into the static, and wait. But by now, the Americans were hunting ghosts in an ocean of equations on the USS England. The mood had shifted. The men were confident but tired. 5 kills had cost more than just sleep. Hedgehog ammunition was running low. Each attack required 24 projectiles. And England had started with only 240. They'd already fired half. A few more full salvos and their deadly advantage would vanish. Pendleton calculated the odds in his head and said nothing. The men didn't need to know how narrow the margins had become. May 30th brought the most cunning opponent yet. Row 105, commanded by an experienced officer who had studied every American hunting tactic. He understood how the Hedgehog worked. He knew the sinking speed of the projectiles, the limits of sonar tracking, the tempo of his enemy's mathematics. And he was ready to turn those numbers against them. At 21:45, US George's radar picked up a faint surface contact, 13,000 yards, then gone. Row 105 had been caught surfacing to recharge batteries. She crash-dived, engines off, running silent at 400 feet. For 4 long hours, she lay motionless in the dark, the Pacific pressing down on her like 1,000 mountains. Above, 3 destroyer escorts swept the area in overlapping circles. The sonar screens flickered with false echoes, the knuckles of disturbed water. Row 105 was there somewhere, but nowhere certain. Pendleton faced a brutal decision. Fire at a weak contact and waste precious ammunition, or wait for the submarine to move and risk losing her entirely. He waited. At 2:30, the faint sonar signal strengthened the submarine was moving. Its batteries were nearly empty. It had no choice but to surface soon. But first, the Japanese commander played one last desperate card. He surfaced 3 miles from his previous position, charged his batteries for 90 seconds, and dove again before radar could lock on. 90 seconds, just enough to give his submarine a pulse of life and a new position. When England reacquired sonar contact at 3:45, Row 105 was moving fast, 6 knots, running northeast. It was a deadly speed. Hedgehog projectiles took 17 seconds to reach 400 feet. In that time, a submarine moving 6 knots traveled 170 feet, enough to slip beyond the pattern entirely. Pendleton ran the numbers in his head. Predict wrong by even a second, and you missed by a football field. At 4:05, he fired the first salvo. 24 projectiles sliced into the dark. Silence. Miss. Row 105 had turned during descent. The second attack came at 4:23. Again, nothing. The submarine was varying speed, 4 knots, then 6. Then back again, an erratic pattern that made prediction nearly impossible. England had now fired 48 projectiles. Half her ammunition gone. Pendleton exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. Maintain contact, he's repeating. At 4:47, the sonar operator called out something new, a rhythm. Every 4 minutes, row 105 turned 30 degrees to port, then 30 degrees to starboard. To the human ear, it sounded random. To Pendleton, it was a pattern. He thinks Hes being unpredictable, he murmured, almost to himself. But no one truly is. He led the target by 200 feet and adjusted the firing angle by 3 degrees to fire. The third Hedgehog salvo roared away at 5:08. 24 bombs entered the Pacific and vanished beneath the waves. Seconds later, 4 detonations, then 5, then silence again. The submarine was hit, but not dead. The pressure hull breached, water flooding in. Inside, the Japanese crew fought chaos sealing hatches, blowing ballast tanks, trying to surface. Pendleton gave no time for mercy. Reload. Same range. Adjust 5 yards forward. At 5:32, the 4th salvo went out. 8 detonations, sharp and final. The ocean erupted in a column of foam and oil. When the spray cleared, the sea was black with debris, wooden planks, insulation, bits of cloth. No sound followed, no survivors called out. At 6:15, as the first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, the men of the USS England stood on deck, staring at the widening oil slick. The Pacific smelled of burnt metal and diesel. It was a scent they would never forget. Kill number 6. 12 days. 6 submarines. 335 Japanese sailors gone. Erased by a weapon once dismissed as unreliable, and by a commander who trusted mathematics more than tradition. In the wardroom, Pendleton wrote his after-action report with steady hands. Each attack logged, each explosion timed to the second. When he finished, he paused, pen hovering above the page. There was one submarine left, row 109, somewhere beyond the horizon, silent and alive. He closed the logbook and looked up. "We're done," he said quietly. The seas had enough, but the war wasn't finished with them yet. Admiral Halsey received the message at 3rd Fleet headquarters the following day. One destroyer Escort, a ship most admirals considered expendable, had destroyed 6 enemy submarines in 12 days. It sounded impossible, almost absurd. Hedgehog had been mocked as a mathematician's toy. Now, it was rewriting naval warfare. Halsey's first instinct was protective. Pull England from combat, preserve the legend before luck ran out. She had proven the weapon beyond doubt. One more engagement wasn't worth the risk. But Commander Haynes protested fiercely. The NA line still had one survivor, row 109. And unfinished hunts left ghosts in the water. Let England finish it, he argued. You don't stop a story halfway through. The order came down on June 1st. England was to stand down. The 6th kill was enough. Pendleton obeyed, though part of him hated the arithmetic. One last number left unsolved. The Americans never found row 109. After the war, Japanese records revealed she had received Toyoda's warning and fled deep toward Truk, abandoning her patrol zone. She survived the war, surrendered in August 1945, and her crew only learned months later what had happened to their squadron. 6 submarines destroyed by one ship in 12 days. The impact of England's patrol was immediate. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific distributed her after-action reports to every escort division. Training manuals were rewritten overnight. Hedgehog crews studied England's firing sequences. Sonar operators memorized her tracking techniques, the patience, the correction for depth, the mathematical precision that turned theory into instinct. Pendleton's cold efficiency had transformed the Hedgehog from a curiosity into the deadliest anti-submarine weapon of the war. The British had invented it, but the Americans perfected it. Statistically, the difference was staggering. Traditional depth charge attacks had required more than 5,000 deployments for 85 confirmed kills, a success rate of 1.6%. Early Hedgehog tests achieved 5%. England's 1,944 patrol achieved 40%. 25 times more effective than depth charges, 8 times more than the Hedgehog average. For the men aboard, those numbers had faces. Every explosion meant another 50 or 60 sailors trapped in a collapsing metal coffin. Victory at sea was rarely clean. Even Pendleton, who trusted math more than emotion, began to feel the weight of what the numbers implied. After June, England returned to escort duty convoy protection. Carrier screening, endless blue horizons. No more submarine contacts. No more kills. She had proven her worth. The ocean had given her silence as reward. Then came October 30. First, 1,944. A kamikaze. A Japanese plane, loaded with explosives and divine conviction, fell out of the clouds and hit England amidships, punching through to the forward engine room. The blast tore through the decks like a sledgehammer. 37 men died instantly. 25 more were wounded. The ship didn't sink, but she was mortally hurt. Repairing her would cost more than building a new vessel from scratch. The Navy made its decision quietly, almost clinically. England was towed to Seidler Harbour, stripped of her instruments, her Hedgehog mounts removed, and her hulk sold for scrap. A few weeks later, she was gone. Her metal melted down into the mundane world she had once defended. Razor blades, tin cans, tools, a legend reduced to utility. But the legend itself survived. In Washington, Admiral King drafted a final report praising Pendleton and his crew for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy submarines. The citation was brief, almost sterile. It couldn't capture what those 12 days had meant not just to naval warfare, but to the quiet kind of courage that believes in numbers over superstition. Because the truth was simple and merciless. The men of the US England had trusted logic more than luck. And in doing so, they'd changed the sea itself. Walton Pendleton survived the war. He was promoted to commander, given charge of an escort division patrolling the frigid North Pacific. Up there, near Alaska and the Aleutians, the ocean felt like another planet, black, silent, endless. He hunted Japanese submarines for another year, but found none. The war was ending, and so was the age of the hunter. When he retired in 1961, after 34 years of service, he carried no medals on his chest beyond the Navy Cross. His gravestone at Arlington lists his rank, his years, and that single decoration. Nowhere does it mention the 6 submarines, the 12 days, or the men whose steady hands had turned theory into legend. History, like the sea, keeps its treasures under pressure. The Navy kept part of its promise. There will always be an England. In October 1960, a new ship bore the name USS England, Day LG-22, later reclassified as a guided missile cruiser. Sleek, angular, born into the Cold War. She served for 32 years, longer than her predecessor ever lived. But when she was decommissioned in 1994, the name disappeared from the Navy rolls. Admiral King's words dissolved into memory. Another echo lost to static. Today, the original Hedgehog launcher, the very weapon that rewrote naval arithmetic, sits in storage at the National Museum of the United States Navy. In Washington, D.C. rust curls along its edges. The display placard mentions innovative, forward-firing design and high success rate. It doesn't mention Pendleton. It doesn't mention his crew. It doesn't mention the 12 days that proved the system worked. Most visitors walk past without noticing. A few pause, frown at the metal tubes, and move on. The sound of footsteps replaces the sound of sonar. But if you listen closely, really listen, you can still hear the faint echo of that other world. The steady ping of a sonar searching through darkness, the metallic clank of a reloading mortar, the pause before impact, silence, and then the low roar of contact, the sound of math made deadly. Japanese naval records recovered after the war confirmed every detail. I-16, row 106, row 104, row 116, row 108, row 105, all matched England's attack coordinates exactly. 335 men dead, none surviving long enough to understand what had killed them. Reports from Tokyo described rapid explosions above, violent flooding below, and instant destruction. They never discovered what weapon had done it. The Hedgehog was a mystery that left no witnesses. For Pendleton's men, it had been the purest kind of warfare. No glory, no faces, just precision. A duel fought entirely by sound and numbers. And in that silence lay a kind of tragedy. Victory so perfect it erased itself. 80 years later, the story survives mostly in naval archives and quiet corners of history forums. Yet every once in a while, someone reads the name US England and pauses. They trace the numbers 6 submarines in 12 days and realize what it meant. It meant that belief in data could be braver than faith in noise, that courage can look like calculation, that victory, sometimes, is just the patience to wait 9 seconds for the truth to rise through the water. So if you've come this far, if the ocean of this story held you, then do what sailors of England never could: speak their names, tell someone about Pendleton. Tell them about the little ship that trusted mathematics more than myth. Because memory, like sonar, only works if you keep sending out the signal. And maybe then, when someone walks past that rusting launcher in Washington, they'll stop and remember that once, in a forgotten corner of the Pacific, a handful of men proved that numbers could kill and that silence could save.